everyone, and welcome to the new episode of Fullfunnel Live. Today episode is all about adapting your marketing and sales programs to new regions or to new regional teams. The reason why we decided to host today's episode is because recently we have received a lot of requests. I also have had a couple of conversations with VPs of marketing of mid-market and enterprise organizations, and the entire narrative was all about we tried to replicate, we kind of launched a successful program, and it could be account-based marketing, it could be demand generation, brand awareness, doesn't really matter, right? We launched in our region that program, then we gave the instructions to our regional team, and it failed. So nothing worked. Or another story, which is, I'm obviously generalizing now the patterns from these conversations. Another story is, okay, we have a successful program that we run in our domestic market. Then we see some traction in a new region, and we kind of think about, okay, so if we see that the traction there, we must literally replicate our program. We try to replicate what works for us in our domestic markets, and it fails. Why? So this is the entire agenda for today's conversation. We would like to share with you our experience, sharing the most typical mistakes, why these programs are failing when you try to replicate them in the new markets or in the new regions, and also share our step-by-step process that we use with our clients to adapt their programs to new markets and to new regions. We are broadcasting from not so sunny Valencian region today. Let us know, guys, in the chat where you're all joining us from. Curious to hear. And while you are sharing in the chat, also quick note, feel free to ask us any questions. We'll pick them up and cover during today's episode. And maybe while you're typing, I will quickly share also another story that Sam Kinley, VP of Marketing at Loxa, shared it with me. It was exactly about the second example. They had a successful program that they were running in the US, and then they saw some traction in Germany. So they tried, obviously, they have an experienced marketing team, and everybody understood that they need to localize it, right? That there are some cultural differences, obviously, between Germany and the United States. But the program didn't work as expected. And when they looked at it, there were a couple of things. First of all, different their target buyer personas in these different regional markets, they use different channels when it comes to professional education, when it comes to vendor evaluation, etc. Second, they have completely different ways for the purchasing decisions. And the messaging that was appealing to the senior HR buyer personas in the US didn't resonate at all with people in Germany, right? So, and obviously, as you guess, the outreach, the ads, all the creatives, and the content wasn't really appealing. And this is one of the kind of most common mistakes that we are seeing. So before sharing the process, I feel that it's important to cover where teams are actually falling down when they try to replicate what works for them in the domestic market. So let's start with this one, Vlad.
Hello, everybody from Rain Valencia. If anybody's wondering, we are both okay. We weren't directly affected by all the floods, although some people have it really terrible in some parts of our province here. But let's get into the weeds of today's topic, which is how to replicate program or how to implement program and localize into the different regions. And the approach that Andre was describing has one good component in it. And the good component of that approach is that you start in one region. It makes totally sense to start with a program in one region and figure out how to make it work, instead of trying to start it in multiple regions, is what I was trying to say. Now, the typical challenges that teams face when they try to replicate that on the other region, and maybe the mistakes that they make, I think like the general one is just thinking about it as kind of like, okay, so now we have a program in a box, right? So we have, we have done it, we have tested it, we have seen that it works. So all we need to do is replicate and localize. And they don't really take into account the specific characteristics of the local market and the team. So what do I mean by that? For example, maybe in one region you're a very well-known brand, while in the other region you're not a known brand. So the level of brand awareness could be different. And obviously, if you are a known brand, if you might be even like not necessarily a leader of the category, but a well-known brand in your market where you ran the first program, you're going to have a completely different reception, and a lot of companies will know of you. While in the other region, you might actually have to actually change your program and focus more on the awareness creation with your target accounts than in the region that you ran your program in initially, or vice versa, right? Now, when it comes to brand awareness, it's also a lot of times what we hear from salespeople is that they say we lose out on brand, which is just to say our brand maybe not well known, or it doesn't seem as strong as our competitor. So what the competitive landscape is in that other region that you're trying to, let's say, replicate success in is also very important, right? So understanding these two things before you start rolling out the program, before you actually think about how the program should be how should the program should look like, how should we adapt it, is important. Now, another set of challenges has to do with the teams, the local teams. Now, one set of challenges has to do with the skill set. So you may have a completely different set of profiles or the level of skills of the people who are working in a local team of the region that you ran this program initially to with the region that you want to replicate this into. So it's really important for you to take a step back and evaluate the skill gap, and of course develop an approach on how to close it, right? Maybe you also work with agencies. Maybe you work with different agencies or different types of agencies. Again, these agencies might have different level of skill, maybe have a completely different approach, etc., etc. Now, when it comes to teams, we all know that for the success of complex B2B marketing and sales programs, such as account-based marketing, it's really important to have alignment and collaboration between marketing and sales team. They need to be aligned on the go-to-market level, they need to be aligned on the accounts, and they need to also have clarity on whose responsibility is what, who has the responsibility to create awareness, and then what happens then, and how do we warm up the accounts. In other words, they need to have shared and individual, but then synchronized playbooks to address those accounts. Now, if this is important, then what also becomes important and can be a major difference between the different regions is the level of sales and marketing collaboration and the relationship that I have, the history that I have, etc. The trust that maybe sales has in marketing, local marketing team, etc., etc. So you might need to do, for example, maybe you have started with a very strong base of collaboration in the original region, and now in the new region, you may need to do much more education and change management to implement proper alignment and collaboration in that region, right? You need to be able to also understand, like, okay, what happens if they don't collaborate as expected? You can't just say, okay, this is what should be done by marketing, this is what should be done by sales, and then things don't happen. Like, what do you do then? So you need to take that into account. And finally, Andre actually already mentioned that, and that is like different market dynamics, different types of buying behaviors that you may have in the different regions. So essentially, for example, what if your content and your messaging is not resonating in that region, in the other region, right? So you might need to adapt that, right? So you need to, it's more than just localize. You first need to understand the way that the buyers are actually buying, the channels that they're using, and also being prepared to potentially also pivot on the content and messaging, and to base it on this initial research of the buyers from the local region, and then also be potentially ready to pivot. And one final thing that I think it's kind of a little bit on a meta level is this is usually an initiative from a global team. Like, so you might be working for a global team, or somebody else is working with you, trying to replicate your success, but there is a specific set of skills that you will need to do if you want to work with another regional team and help them, let's say, replicate your success, help them implement your team. Part of it we are going to try to solve today by sharing the framework that we use, but I just wanted to indicate that it's a bit of like, the fact that somebody is good at something doesn't make them a good teacher or a consultant. Let me put it like that, right? So we know that from experience, right? So the fact that you're really good at something, you have like great professionals who are just like amazing at their craft, and then they appear, let's say, on a podcast, and they are not such a great guest. They're not able to explain the framework behind the way that they do things, and the framework that you need to implement in order to be able to replicate that success. So just a good practitioner is not always a good teacher or consultant. That's a little bit what you need to be, right? If you need to do that change management, you need to train and help that people close that skill gap. If you need to help them, improve their collaboration with sales and marketing, implement something that they have not implemented before, they're looking at you maybe because you had that good experience. That's a little bit the role that you will need to play. But to help you with that, let's dive into the framework that we would use in that situation, to adapt the program to the local markets. Andrei, you want to share that?
Yeah, I will try to zoom in so everybody could see it. And recently we posted about this process on LinkedIn, but obviously you can't explain everything in one post. There were quite a lot of questions around that process, so I would like to cover this. And in a nutshell, right, to summarize everything that Vlad said, it's really important not replicating let's say literally copy pasting your program to the new market or throwing it to the new team, but creating central frameworks. And frameworks are the actions, the questions, right, the playbooks that the team can adapt, right, to their own reality, to their goals, to their needs. And the first step is obviously analyzing the current market situation and the go-to-market strategy of the regional team. If you want to, let's say, if you want regional team to replicate your program, or analyzing the market if you want, or segment if you want to penetrate into that market. There are a couple of questions that we highly recommend to work on. The first one is, what go-to-market challenges do we face in the new market or segment? Why? Coming back to the same story, right? So we saw some traction in Germany, and that's why we decided to focus on that market. But then, if you don't have experience of selling to that market, maybe you have a couple of clients there, maybe you see some requests, maybe you see some traffic spike, but it doesn't mean that on that specific market you have really solid brand awareness, right? So first of all, you need to start with a honest conversation. Do we actually have a good brand awareness there? Who are our competitors? Are we losing on the brand level to them, right? What we have tried so far on that market, if that's working or no. So was it like an occasional success, or there is a clear pattern that we are winning on that market, right? You need to be very clear, because the goals that you'll be setting up for your pilot program should be aligned with the reality, right, what you are facing. Now, quite often, let's say the company on their domestic market, they have successfully built some brand, they have some recognition, they have traction, they have clients, right? But when they come to the new market or the new segment, they might be absolutely not known, which means that instead of maybe asking that team to close the revenue and focus on new pipeline generation, maybe it's worth, first of all, to set up different goal, raise brand awareness on that region. And obviously, you need to define tangible criteria, right? What does it mean to raise brand awareness? So how are you going to measure it? Or maybe you have a few enterprise clients there, and instead of trying to generate new logo, it would be more fruitful and more beneficial for a team to work on the expansion program, right? Or maybe you have seen that on that market, you are winning this, or let's say you are generating pipeline, but this pipeline is not moving forward. There are a lot of stalled deals, and in this case, it makes sense to focus on pipeline acceleration. So instead of just blindly saying, hey, try to replicate what we are doing currently here, think about what would be the lowest hanging fruit, right? Next, this is especially important if you have regional team or if you want to hire regional agency, right? You need to evaluate what is the skill set that you have in that team and what is experience of running similar programs. Because if these teams have never done it or never done it the way you are doing it in your headquarters, the chances that they will screw it are really high. You need to train them. It's not just enough to throw the playbooks and the guidance or the assets, right? The marketing creatives. Hey, here's the targeting, here's the messaging that we use. Go and just generate similar results. No way, it's not possible. So you can't expect, I'm always sharing this parallel, right? If you come to the gym for the first time, right? Is it realistic to tell you, hey, go and do, the same workout as that guy with big muscles? Obviously, it's not realistically possible, right? Whatever, you can pick up any of the examples from the real life, right? So this is really important. And lastly, we have seen again this with companies that have regional teams. If you just show the assets and say, hey, here's working for us in the US, but we want to replicate this in the EMEA region, then you're not going to get buy-in. If people see that it's not aligned with their reality, if it's not aligned with what they know works on that market, they would just, feel that they're working in silos, that they are not heard, and they obviously would screw the program and try to sabotage it. It's just the reality. So these are the most crucial questions. Aside from this, it's obviously we can make a step back and also think about which region you need to focus on and why. For this reason, you can analyze historical growth and pipeline velocity, but that's another story. So these 4 questions would be the most important when you decide how to position your program and what should be your main focus. When you agree on these points with your local team, or if you want to penetrate into a new market, when you accept the reality and you define the focus for your, let's say, new region and new segment program, the next step would be developing regional ICP, which could be completely different from your headquarters ICP. So maybe let's touch that part a lot.
Yeah, I think Andrei touched on it a little bit when he was sharing that example between Germany and the United States. In, for example, the difference in the way that people were buying, the difference of the structure of the buying committee, etc. Right? The way that we would think about it is, or the checklist that, let's say, you could use, the questions that you could ask yourself as you're working on localizing the program, let's say, with regards to ICP. And the way that you could practically do that is simply start by analyzing the won deals from that region and start understanding what are the use cases, the common use cases, the main reason why the customers buy the product, and the main jobs to be done that they had. How can we segment, let's say, that market, and in which it says here in the text, in which clusters, and that is to say, in which segments as they relate to these different use cases, in some cases maybe industries, but we like to look at the different use cases. Do we see a higher win rate, annual contract value or deal size, shorter sales cycle? And when I say all of this, when I mention all of these metrics, what I mean is specifically analyzing the deals in that region. So we are looking at the metrics from that region, because it may be that you have different maturity of the market, or for any other reason that you have a similar use case in two regions, but one is performing much better in one region than in the other. So another thing to consider when you're looking at these different segments, let's say use cases, is where do I actually have a real competitive advantage, right? So again, this will also depend on the main competitors in the region, right? So let's say in one region you might have, let's say you are selling, let's say software that helps HR managers in hiring, and you know that you have a really strong competitive advantage in hiring remotely. And let's say in your home market, North American market, but then you might go to EMEA, go to Europe, and realize there is a big competitor who actually does that at least as good as you, or maybe even better. So suddenly you don't necessarily have as big of a competitive advantage when it comes to this specific segment of accounts, this specific use case, as you might have in the other region. That's why it's important to actually kind of take that step back and evaluate it. And then what you want to do next is take, let's say, the top accounts from with that use case that is you have selected to be the high priority one, and study the best accounts and start to understand, okay, what are the characteristics of those accounts? For example, we know that, for example, when we speak about mid-market and enterprise, these things can mean different things in different regions. A small company in the United States could be considered medium-sized or even large companies in some European countries, right? So it's important to start understanding, both from the basic information like that, the firmographics information like that, how do our best accounts from that region look like, but also other characteristics. Maybe, let's say, in one region, we know that when a new, let's say, leader joins, let's say, again, you're selling HR, and then a new HR leader joins, maybe this is a good trigger, let's say, in the North America to actually start talking to that account. But maybe in other regions, these kind of leaders are more risk averse, or just the company culture is different, and that may not be just the right time. Maybe you need to hold off for another quarter before you start talking to them. I'm thinking of examples here just to give you an idea about what kind of characteristics you might be thinking about as you're analyzing those accounts. Try to find common patterns that are specific to the region. And then we already mentioned this again, you may have different channels that the local companies use, or buyers in the local companies use, to educate themselves, learn about, discover solutions, learn about solutions, get recommendations. Maybe like in some industries, for example, in Europe, also in the United States, I know you have very strong associations. But this could be like very, very specific to a local industry and in a specific geography or in a specific region, right? And you may not have that in another region, or vice versa. Maybe you would miss that opportunity if you weren't aware of that. Again, communities. We know, for example, as well from our experience, that in the United States, you usually have a stronger communities. You have more engaged communities that you might have in Europe, for example, just to pick on that. And anyhow, the best thing you can do is, again, through customer research, through analyzing those top accounts, and potentially also interviewing those buyers, understanding where they actually hang out and learn. And so I think as you're trying to localize your program, to summarize, look at the ICP by basically zooming in on the deals and top accounts from that region, understanding what are the common patterns that make a good fit versus a bad fit, and where do we have a competitive advantage we should be focused on in terms of the segments, which channels make sense for that regions and which may not.
And that leads us to the next point, right? Just because you might have different ideal customer profile, right? You need to have potentially completely different, maybe not completely different messaging, but messaging that is adjusted to the values, to the jobs to be done, to the cultural aspects of that specific, let's say, ICP in that specific market. So also we mentioned that, let's say, if you have regional team, they might have different skill set and different experience of running similar programs. Same could be applied to your buyers. They might have, I mean, if we can maybe call it that way, they might be at different maturity level of using, let's say, services or products like yours, right? So on some markets, they might not be, I mean, in some verticals, let's say, they could be stable. For example, I had a call with VP of marketing yesterday, and they are selling to FMCG sector, and she mentioned that this was industry where nothing changed for decades, and people used to do the things the way they have done forever. That became a standard. And just because in FMCG companies, these are usually big corporations, right, big manufacturers, people stay for years, nobody wants to change, right? And in some markets, obviously some markets could be more advanced, right? And let's say, I don't know, I'm just sharing an example. Let's say if you are targeting Singapore, right? These people might be more advanced and using technology more often, and they are looking for the solutions. But let's say in some European markets, just people don't want to change. As simple as that, right? And even if you are doing ABM expansion, let's say you are selling to one account, let's say Nestle or Coca-Cola in the United States, it doesn't mean that Coca-Cola in EMEA or Coca-Cola Central Europe would be willing to use your product just because US headquarters using it, right? Where I'm heading with this? Several things. So first of all, you need to adjust your content to the specifics of that market and your messaging. You need to talk about the jobs to be done of these people, reality of their market, the competition. Look at what the local competitors are doing, right? And think about how you can differentiate yourself. Next, like Vlad said, it's always important to understand the typical use cases, right? And then also look at the regional market and industry trends, right? So in some markets, everybody could be talking about AI and all of the different stuff, but there could be other markets where people still look at completely different, areas and might not be considering, let's say, the benefits, the values that your product provides as something that is really important for them. So this is something that you need to consider and adjust everything, because when it comes to messaging, it's not only your, let's say, local website, a local landing page. It's the content that you create, it's the ads that you're running, it's the, let's say, scripts that your sales team is using when reaching out to potential customers. So that's really important. And to help you with this, to help you to adjust your, let's say, your content and messaging, we always recommend to look at 3 questions. Number 1, what are the old ways that these companies are dealing with the challenges? Like I mentioned, there are people who are staying for decades and they don't want to change. So for you, it's one of the central pieces of your messaging should be the content that helps to initiate the change management, right? And trigger that change management, help your buyers, to help your champions to be able to change the status quo, right? Then what should they know about solving their challenges the right way. Like I mentioned, the different, let's say, maturity levels. It doesn't mean, I mean, I'm obviously not talking about the skill set of these people, but just the reality of that market, that they might not be mature when it comes to technology or to the offering that you provide, right? So sometimes you just, instead of talking about benefits, you need to talk about, let's say, the root reasons of their challenges, why these challenges are happening, just focusing a lot on this. So this way you are seeding the grain. There is something broken in our processes, because quite often people, they can't connect the dots between your product and their challenges. They might feel your product is valuable, but they don't see how to fit it into their processes, right? And when there is no bridge between your offering and their priorities, you are not able to sell. So as simple as that, right? And your messaging should help with this. And lastly, right, what are the regional trends? So what's happening in this market? You can analyze the local thought leaders. You can look at local communities. You can look at local conferences, events, right? And the topics, the narrative that is happening there. And then you should adjust to it, because, like, as I mentioned, something that you are talking about in the US doesn't mean that people in Germany would be talking about the same things, right? So this would be helpful tips. And when you finish adjusting your messaging and content, you move to the next part, adjusting your playbooks.
And this is basically where kind of the rubber hits the road, or where you start combining all these insights that you have gathered so far. So when we say playbooks, we mean the specific activities, contents, and channels, right, that you will use to generate awareness and demand, and let's say move from that initial awareness, engagement, etc., into conversations later on, sales opportunities, right? Again, if we had to adapt the way that we are creating content, let's say the root reason may be that you need to create more awareness, because there's less brand awareness. Maybe there's even less kind of solution awareness in the specific market, which means that you need to do things like Andre was just talking about. You need to go a step back and start associating your brand with the strategic challenges that they know, where your product may be just a part of it. Again, to use an example of, let's say, a hiring solution. So you have some sort of a HR hiring solution that helps HR managers with, some specific steps. I don't know, let's say some sort of like super smart CV processing. I don't know if that makes sense, right? But you would have to realize that this is only one step in the process that they have. This is not maybe their top of the mind challenge. So this is not something that they think about all the time. And if we know that a lot of those people are not, or those accounts are actually not in the market right now, and are not looking for a solution for, let's say, smart saving processing, whatever that is, if that such a thing exists, any communication, let's say, more about the product would fall on deaf ears. It wouldn't really create any engagement. It wouldn't create the awareness that you need to create. So you need to kind of link that to the strategic, like Andre said, you need to connect those dots. So if this is the case, and it wasn't the case in the original region, well, this impacts not only the content that you will writing, but also like maybe impact also the channel that you're going to use because like when we talk about awareness, right, then we can also think about in channels with low intent, right? So maybe in the regional region, we could also focus a lot on capturing the existing demand, because there was a lot of awareness. We could do things like we could really lean into Google ads, maybe some SaaS directories if you're selling a SaaS solution, advertising on those. And in the new region where there is less demand and we have to create this awareness, we have to go to in low intent channels such as social and communities, and maybe partnering with local thought leaders or industry leaders, associations, or whomever. So being on places where your buyers are, where they come not necessarily to learn about the new solution, specific solution that you have, but to just improve themselves professionally, to improve their skills, to improve their understanding, to learn about what's happening in the industry, and start having conversation and start basically sharing content that will actually position you as somebody who understands their challenges, and start actually creating the awareness about different ways of dealing with the maybe status quo that they are accepting right now, right? So that's why I'm saying, like, you will need to revise your playbooks, because it may impact even the channel that you're using, if you need to create, let's say, more awareness, or that the different channels are being used, and also how you connect those activities. Now, when it comes to activities that come and the playbooks that come after awareness creation, where you start to actually nurture your accounts with multiple touch points, right? Again, different regions may require different activities and approach. So I just know from one client, for example, where in one region they used events and ran also a lot of webinars, so local events, but also webinars together with some media partners. This worked really, really well in the UK. And when they tried to replicate a very similar setup in the United States, it didn't work that well. I don't know all the details. I can assume maybe there was, a lot more events, and they didn't pay attention to that. They didn't position their event. Like, why should I come to your event when I already have an abundance of choices? And by the way, I don't know your brand, so why should I come to your event? And maybe the kind of topics that they were addressing in the UK were still, or there weren't that many events about those topics. So just to give an example of one of these nurturing activities that you might use in your playbooks, right? And how you might have to adapt it to the different region. And I think also important is part of our playbooks is not just what we do to these accounts, but also how we select and prioritize those accounts. I mean, it can be as simple as trying to replicate success from one region where you're using, let's say you started in Europe and you're using one of our favorite tools, Dealfront, to start understanding the engagement that your target accounts have with your brand, with your website, and your demand generation programs, events, etc., etc. And then you go to the United States, and maybe you discover that for your industries, for your buyers, maybe Dealfront doesn't have as good of data in the United States. I may be wrong about it. Please, Dealfront, don't mind me saying, using you as an example in this way. But I think you get the picture, right? So even as simple as that, so the way that you get your data, obviously, you might be coming from the United States, where you used to be using some activities that might be more loose when it comes to interpretation of GDPR, and then you come to Germany, which is very strict when it comes to interpretation of GDPR, and you might simply not be able to use those activities, or people might start really complaining, as they tend to like to do in some regions in Europe. And and you may have to change your tactics, right? So this is an example there that came to my mind was RB2B, right? The tool that identifies personally people who are visiting your website is only actually for the United States and can't be used in Europe, as just an example. And so I think using these tools to, for example, understand the engagement of those accounts so they can use and prioritize, but also just in general, as you were analyzing your target accounts, as you were refining your ICP, you might realize that there will be other different characteristics or different buying signals that you may have to pay attention to. So in practice, you might have to look at different sources of data, but also different data themselves, different signals themselves, as you're prioritizing accounts. And finally, as you start running these programs, it's also important to pay attention to the results and how we measure these programs and how we communicate about this, so that leads us to the last point here, expectations and metrics.
And basically, if we'll wrap up everything, right, you can't set up the same expectations and the same targets as you're currently achieving or hitting in your domestic market or in your target region or in your target segment. So when you define the focus and then you recreate your playbooks, right, using your central framework, next step would be what should be our realistic expectations. I don't know, obviously in ideal world you should have the stats from the pilot programs that you have done, but in reality I don't know any organization who has this data, right? So it would be hard to compare. But if you documented this, right, it would be good to set up this as an internal benchmark. We have done the pilot program. This is what we have achieved with under these certain circumstances. So more or less you can start from that point. If no, then just think about, okay, because we are going to invest the time of our team, right? We are going to invest some budget. What would be the meaningful outcomes of that program? And always make it tangible, always connect it to pipeline and revenue. I think a lot of programs are falling down, especially if you involve regional team and just share with them, the playbook and the assets, when they don't see how that program could help them to generate revenue. Especially, let's say, it happens with account-based marketing when you want to involve regional sales team and you have regional VP of sales, right? And that person sees the program and then starts questioning it. Okay, I see a lot of activities, but how actually we're going to hit our targets? And if that person doesn't have a clear answer, right, then the chances that the team won't buy in are really high. So you need to, first of all, whenever you set up these expectations and you define the targets, make sure that even if it's, let's say, we want to create brand awareness, make sure that the dots are connected, right? So the easiest way, and I want just to share a practical example for it, right? We have we want to create, we have, let's say, regional team has a list of prioritized accounts. Next, you discuss the biggest problem. We have lack of awareness. Our sales team can't even get a reply to the outreach, right, that they are currently running. And we don't see a lot of traction and engagement with our ads. So we want to create awareness in these target accounts. How are we going to measure this? And then altogether, you define criteria. What specific engagement threshold an account must hit so you can call that account vendor aware, right? That could be visiting your high intent pages, right? And spending some time, let's say 10 minutes on high intent pages and repetitive visits, right? Maybe coming up to your field event, right? Maybe just connecting and having conversations with your sales reps. So something like this, you define, and this what we call, these are the lagging indicators, right? When you define these lagging indicators and you define what would be good, obviously you can't, like, coming back to our gym example, right? You can't just tell the guy, hey, you are like, you see that guy with the big muscles, you need to replicate, the workout that this guy is doing. Obviously, no way you should be doing this, right? So set up what could be realistically good for this team. Look at their current status, at their current metrics, and then set up the incremental improvements. When you set up these lagging indicators, because pipeline, revenue, conversations, vendor awareness, spike, engagement spike, these are the lagging indicators. These are the results of your activities, right? Then you need to define leading indicators. What can we do as a team to ensure that we'll hit these lagging indicators, right? What activities, what touch points should we run with our target buyer personas to be able to hit these leading indicators? And lastly, how can we create a simple report that everybody would understand? You don't need to talk about MQLs here, whatever, right? So you just focus on 3, 5, 6 metrics that are important to everybody, and ensure that this report is visible. This report, there is an account owner, report owner, and then there is an accountable person for each of these metrics, right? You create a simple dashboard that you can cross-share with everybody. You can create it in your CRM, for example, if you use HubSpot, or you can use spreadsheets, doesn't really matter, but it should be something that everybody could access with one click and understand what's going on. And lastly, I think one of the biggest problem is not setting up an accountable person that driving this regional or this new program to the new region or to new segments. Quite often it's just literally, hey, we have this program, go and replicate it. No way. You need to operate as center of excellence. You need to operate as a coach, right? Especially if you have regional teams, which means that you need to onboard them. You need to provide critical feedback. You need to help them to adapt your playbooks, right? And you guide them on the way. So this is the only way. Just forget about throw the playbook and assets and forget about it. It never works like this. And the same if you don't have a regional team, but you want to penetrate into new market or into new segment, you need to have somebody who is accountable for this and who is then running and maintaining the entire program. That person should have access to all stakeholders, right? That person must get the buy-in beforehand, before starting that program. And that person should be able to troubleshoot the challenges, right, or some critical issues, and get immediate help and feedback. So these are the most important steps to adapt your programs to new markets, the new regions, or the new segments. Hope you guys found it valuable. We tried to cover all the questions that you submitted when signed up for this live podcast. We tried to keep it as practical as possible with a lot of examples. So hopefully we did a good job. Let us know in the chat. And like always, next week we'll host a new podcast episode. We'll announce it on Monday. So stay tuned. Have a good Halloween party and see you the next week. Cheers.
Bye.